Greetings, programs, and welcome to the Awesome Friday podcast for November the 12th, 2023. My name is Matthew, and with me, as always, Simon, and we are going to talk about some movies today. But before we do that, how are you? How are you today, Simon?
Fine. I'm enjoying you almost getting your name wrong. I am fine. It's been a weird week. My wife had food poisoning from a roast chicken that had been out too long, and so I had 2 hours sleep Sunday night, and then on Monday I took the kids to school and I delivered a webinar, and after 2 hours sleep, and it was a 2-hour webinar, and about 15 minutes from the end I forgot how to put words together. Like my brain just turned off.
Just stopped. Yeah, I've had that.
It's a reminder of how important sleep is. So I've been enjoying catching up on sleep this week. This is such a rock and roll life I lead. But
yep.
My having kids kind of broke my dependency on sleep anyway, so I'm pretty functional after almost no sleep. But sure is nice getting it back again. How was your week?
Mine kind of sucked for not totally different reasons. I threw my back out last weekend, as I think we talked about.
How was that?
And then this week I had my COVID/flu shot midweek, and that really knocked me on my ass in a way that I wasn't quite expecting from previous shots. Partly because my back was already thrown out, and then I hate shots, so I'm sure this is because I tensed up when they were giving it to me, but it made my back feel a lot worse for the rest of the week. No. In addition to just being the sort of normal, kind of foggy that you can get from those shots.
Yeah.
And just lethargic. So it's been a long week. But I did watch a bunch of movies, so that's nice.
All right.
Yeah. I revisited a movie from my childhood for the first time in a long time. I recently acquired, I think I told you and the show last week, the week before, that I purchased La Bamba on Criterion Blu-ray. And let me tell you, that movie is great.
I didn't know. Honestly, I didn't know it was meant to be good. I'm always a little bit surprised how much you love La Bamba, because I've never seen it, and I didn't think it was meant to be good. And so I'm really pleased that you love that film.
So what's interesting about it, I mean, I think, not gonna lie, part of what makes it good is that the soundtrack is 100% bangers. You can't watch a 100-minute movie that is full of songs like La Bamba and Come On Let's Go, and then also Summertime Blues and Lonely Teardrops are every song on it is great, and they're all extremely well performed. But what's interesting is I haven't seen this movie in a long time. I sort of bought it on a whim, and what's very interesting about it is that, for those of you who know, the movie Walk Hard has effectively ruined the music biopic genre, because it hits so many of the beats that every music biopic hits, every single one. And La Bamba actually doesn't hit most of them. Probably because Ritchie Valens was, kind of a flash in the pan. He was discovered when he was 17, and he died when he was 18, 9 months later. So he didn't really have a chance to make a huge impact. Which also meant that he didn't have the time to hit all of these music biopic milestones that Walk Hard so just effectively satirizes, to the point where every time I sit down and watch specifically some kind of music biopic, at the end of it I'm just I could have just watched Walk Hard. It would have been a better experience.
I need to walk up, because this is your frame of reference.
There's definitely times where I'll be watching a movie about a singer or a band, and I'll be like, oh, I know what's going to happen next, because it's hilarious when they do it in Walk Hard, because every movie does this. But again, for better or for worse, La Bamba doesn't do those things. And it actually paints a really, I think, nuanced. So Ritchie Valens' brother in the movie, his name is Bob, is, he's the fuck up brother, which many movies do have, but he's also talented in his own right, and just desperate for any of the attention that Richie gets from his parents. And it's a really interesting and nuanced performance from S.I. and Morales. And he would almost be a sympathetic character if he wasn't also technically a rapist in the movie, which kind of sucks. Which is, I mean, it's the movie was made in '87, and there's some stuff in it that like you're like, oh, in 1987 this was probably fine, and in 2023, not so much. But also it's also just like a much darker, weirder movie than I remember. Like there's a moment in the movie where Richie Valens gets inspired to be like, I want to sing La Bamba, like I want to sing this Mexican folk song, I want to make it rock and roll but still do it in Spanish. It's a really interesting scene, and it takes place in a brothel in Tijuana.
I mean, that's
like it is a super dark, super weird movie compared to the movie you think it's going to be.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also like for the longest time, like I didn't find out that it was lip synced until like I don't know 5-6 years ago, because it is the gold standard of lip sync performance in a film, I would say. But also like I've had La Bamba, the song, running through my head for days because that is a absolute banger of a song.
Well,
and turns out
you've sold it.
Turns out too, when you're old enough to like and familiar enough with Spanish to sort of understand what they're saying, or even if you just, I don't know, you could look up the lyrics as well. But like that song is a lot easier to sing when you know what they're saying, it turns out.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Can you sing it in Spanish though? Do you know all the Spanish words?
I know most of them.
Yeah. I no idea. We sing it. It's a very popular song to sing very drunk at weddings in England. I'm not sure if it's the case here, but it's a wedding classic for us.
Yeah, and I'm sure that the English version of it is something like "ba da ba ba la bamba."
Alabama, Feliz. Yeah, we all like bulldoze our way through it terribly.
Yeah,
I'm sure.
It's actually para bailar la bamba, to dance la bamba.
Wow.
Yeah.
There we are. I would love to learn Spanish. I would love to. I'm really, really bad at learning languages, which always confuse me because I have to teach one language very particularly. So you would have thought my brain would be open to learning other languages. I know you still learn Italian, don't you? And I've always wished I could just download Spanish into my head.
So interestingly, if you do learn another Romance language like Italian, Spanish becomes a lot easier.
Yeah.
But I actually switched back to French recently after I lost my 984-day streak of learning Italian in Duolingo.
No, what happened?
I missed too many days. Like I missed a second day. I didn't have a streak freeze, and I wasn't willing to pay the money they wanted me to restore the streak. So I switched back to French, thinking, well, I am Canadian. I should really brush up.
Yeah, but it's not real French, as I'm learning from my two French kids, French immersion kids. Canadian
Québécois Français is a different dialect of French.
It's a whole different ball game completely.
Yeah. But if you know one, if you know French, you can understand. You can understand one if you understand the other, mostly.
I would have thought you're particularly good at learning languages because you have the capacity to remember the tiniest of details from any Star Trek episode, from any generation of Star Trek. So I would have thought that type of memory would be good for holding on to grammar, construction, and vocabulary as well. It's basically you gotta make room, get rid of, delete some of that Star Trek knowledge and insert some international language vocabulary, and I think you'll be fine.
Nah.
I do. So I hate LinkedIn. I'm looking at LinkedIn more now because of my job situation. And what I really enjoy, I'm confused how LinkedIn wants to be a social media site now. But in amongst the congratulate Karen on 12 years as working as an actuary, it's Matt like. So they've updated Star Trek. There was an episode of Star Trek where they updated some UI, like the torpedo release of the V-Class. So I've decided to rewrite my entire CSS project, which is the UI of classic Star Trek, to incorporate the torpedo launch valve. I'm like, wow, like I want to have that brain.
I mean, come on. The main Star Trek things that I've done on LinkedIn were some CSS projects where I recreated the LCARS interface and then also recreated a TNG era pad,
But
which is,
there was one episode where they showed one bit of UI that was slightly different, and you went and just incorporated it, just like, oh, I'm going to redo it now so it's accurate. I love that. I kind of love that.
Yeah, but the other nice thing is that if you do the programming right the first time, then that change becomes fairly incidental. So,
anyway, this is not that podcast. You should do a programming podcast with me, an ignorant, and you talk to me about programming, and I ask you questions in the most kindergarten way possible, and you explain.
I feel like we would need a person who's not to talk myself down, but we would definitely need someone who's more of an expert in a wider breadth of things for that kind of show than me.
Nah. Hey, you're full stack, and I know what that means now. You like both the front end and you like the back end, so I've heard.
That's what she said.
Anyway,
yeah.
should we talk about some things?
We should probably talk about some movies now that we've gotten That's What She Said in there. So that's what we're going to do. Before we get started, just as always, if you're listening, thank you so much in advance. If you like what you hear, we do have... we're on all the socials, and there will be links in the show notes. And we do have a Patreon, which will also be in the show notes. If you like what you've heard, please feel free, consider supporting us either that way or with a like, follow, subscribe, whatever, a 5-star rating on your podcasting platform of choice. All these things help immeasurably. And we will talk a little bit more about it at the end of the show. But for now, let's talk about some movies, or in this week's episode's case, we're going to talk about a film and also a television series. But we're going to start with the film, and I'm going to ask Simon to give us the briefest of lowdowns on the new David Fincher film from Netflix, The Killer.
Well, The Killer stars Michael Fassbender as the killer, and he is a killer, a contract killer, and he basically takes us through his process of being a killer, or maybe even the killer. If you've ever played the game Hitman, especially Blood Money, then you will instantly recognize this movie, because this movie is a almost perfect adaptation of the video game Hitman, far better than the movies of that game series actually are. And he, through this self-narration, we get into his sort of mindset, and we join him on a hit. And then through some circumstances, something goes wrong, and it leads to a domino effect of cleanups, which piss him off, and he decides to clean up the cleanups. And basically, it's a fascinating insight into an assassin using elements of the modern world in their process in a way I haven't seen before. And it's also somehow a mix between Hitman and The Conversation and The Wizard of Oz, as he kind of has, and Falling Down, like he has he's having pretty much an existential crisis, and we join him in that, and it is a masterpiece. And I really can't say anything more about it, because it unfolds in a way that you need to go in completely blind. And I would say it's Fincher's best movie. So I haven't seen Zodiac, so this is a difficult one for me. There are metaphors here. It does feel in so many ways as a companion piece to some of his earlier work, like Fight Club. But I think it's probably Fincher's best movie in decades. And
in decades.
It's a masterpiece, yeah. Wait, how? So I was, when Fight Club came out in '99. So that's decades, right? So yeah, I would say it's his best movie in decades.
You're saying it's his best film since Fight Club?
I don't like the game at all, and
Well,
I
the
really like
game
social
was the game was
after Fight Club.
97.
Game was after Fight Club, or was it? Or was it between Seven and Fight Club?
No, so the
Hmm.
game came out in 97. Fight Club came out in 99,
Yes.
and 7 came out in 95,
Right. So
95,
it's
95.
seven the game and then Fight Club. Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So I love Social Network very very much. But I think this is his best movie since Fight Club. Yes.
Well,
I
you haven't seen Zodiac,
I've seen
so
Zodiac, and you love Zodiac. Zodiac, to be fair, is very high on my list, and I'm very very sure because I love Jake Gyllenhaal as well. Um, I'm sure that might interfere with that rating, but this movie I think is just a there's just the way it's told, and I've said this to you a lot recently. Is that I've come to realize that it's not just a creative story; it's the way that story is told through the script, through the characterization, through the acting, through the drip feed of one thing leading to another. And I think that side of this movie is like a peerless example of how to do a character study uh, at the in the right speed, and it's got some elements of drive in there as well, where the character, the inner character of who this person really is revealed in unexpected moments, and then put away again like it's a gun coming out of a case. Like uh, it's exceptional. This movie just blew me away, and there is a I don't want to call it a monologue, but it is a one person leads a scene later on, and this person has a habit of going into movies and being the best thing in that movie, and there is a scene between Fassbender and this actor, and it is like a classic scene, like instant classic scene, and Fincher and his editors give it the space it needs. Like it doesn't feel rushed. There's moments for breathing. There's moments for thinking. Um, I think this is probably one of Fassbender's best acting performances as well. This is the kind of Fassbender performance that we used to get when he first broke onto the scene. I got incredibly excited about Fassbender, and I think he's made some choices that I wasn't expecting he would make over his career. But I think this is him like showing that he is I kind of thought of him a lot with De Niro parallels when with a young De Niro when he first broke to the scene, and this feels so much like that quality as well. He's brilliant, and he barely says anything outside of a narration. And on that point, I usually really dislike narration in movies because it usually tells you things that a good filmmaker should just show you instead of telling you. And this is one of the few examples where the narration for me enhanced the film. It was so well written and bounced so well off the visual, it kind of blew me away. So
Hmm.
yeah, I'm all over this film. Loved it, and I saw it. You saw it in the cinema, didn't you? And we've talked a lot recently about what the cinema experience means and how I don't really miss it. But for a few things, I would have gone to see this in the cinema. In fact, I might still do that.
I mean, if you can, I don't know if it's still playing. Um,
Mm,
and to be fair, I saw it. So I'll say that I am 100% happy that I did see it in a cinema. I think seeing it on the biggest screen possible with full cinema sound was a super useful and super good thing. I saw it at a press screening, so it was me and literally I think there were two other people there.
mm,
So I did see it in a cinema, but I effectively saw it alone, which, to be fair, is my favorite way to see a movie in a cinema.
mm. Yeah.
Um, unless it's something like the Marvels, where like there's a lot of crowd reaction. Which, by the way, the Marvels is great. We're not talking about it this week, but the Marvels is great.
Hmm.
Um, I also really like this movie. I didn't like it as much as you did, but I still think it's one of the better movies of the year. I think for me, if it ends up in my top 10 list, it'll be toward the bottom, but it will almost certainly be on my top 10 list. Let's put it that way.
Interesting.
My concerns here, just to like, so everything you're saying is basically true. The scene you're talking about, and it's just out there, so I don't think that it's necessarily too much of a spoiler to say that that scene with Tilda Swinton is maybe my favorite acted scene of the entire year.
Mm-hmm.
Because Fassbender does it's a conversation, and he says almost nothing, but you know at every single moment exactly what he's thinking, and I think that that's a real feat. Like it's hard enough for most actors, even great actors, to really convey the inner monologue of someone without having a narration or something. And in this scene, which does not have narration, you know exactly what he's thinking and feeling throughout the whole thing. And having seen it twice now, because I watched it, it's now out on Netflix, so I saw it once in a cinema and once at home.
Mm-hmm.
He does the same thing in two other scenes, actually. I just think the Tilda Swinton one is by far the best of them, but he is the way the character is written and shot and performed is so good at just being in a room and letting the other actor take the space and like react to what they know Fassbender is. All three of those scenes are incredible. Like I say, the Tilda Swinton one is the best one, but there's an earlier one with Charles Parnell that is similarly great. And even there was one at the end with Arliss Howard, which is it's one of the only areas, and I don't want to talk about it because I want you to see the movie, but there's one of the only areas of the movie where I feel like the way that scene resolves works for me in terms of the metaphor, but not necessarily in terms of the movie. If that makes sense. But yeah, this movie is I think a top tier Fassbender performance, and I think that even if you're someone who watches it and doesn't connect with it, it's such a meticulously crafted film. Like Fincher is so exacting, and I think I said this. I wrote a review of this movie a couple weeks ago for Real, and one of the things I pointed out was that it feels very, in a way, autobiographical, because this is a movie about a man who's a perfectionist who's basically trying to convince you that he's not a raging torrent of emotion whilst being a raging torrent of emotion in the face of imperfection. It's really something else to behold. It is very subtle. I do know some people who will probably think it's too subtle in terms of the way that, like, what's interesting about the movie is that the whole movie, Fassbender's narration is basically trying to convince you that, like, I am emotionless. Empathy is a weakness. I don't feel anything, whilst feeling things very deeply with a blank look on his face. And I think it's a very difficult needle to thread. And I think that plus I can see the narration coming off as a bit cold, like a bit too sardonic, maybe. Is that the right word? Sardonic? Yeah, probably. And I think some people are going to bounce off this movie pretty hard. However, I think everyone should give it a try. I don't think, even if you end up not really connecting with it, I think that, like, this is 2 hours well spent for literally anyone, just to see some of the ways that some of the filmmaking, some of the performances are definitely going to stick with you, even if you don't like the film on the whole. Which makes it one of the better movies of the year, I would argue. Like I say, there's a very good chance this is going to end up in my top 10. Again, probably in the lower half, but definitely in my top 10. It's not my favorite Fincher movie. I think he's made a lot of films I definitely connect with in a much deeper way. Like Zodiac is a perfect film, for example, and I still think that The Social Network is basically a perfect film. I know it's an unpopular opinion, but I actually think The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo is an endlessly rewatchable movie that gets better every time I see it.
Really?
Yeah. But we're talking about, like, if we're talking about my ranking of Fincher films, he's directed 12 feature films. And, like, if I say Mank is at the bottom, because Mank is at the bottom of my list for sure, I would still say Mank is a 3 out of 5. So, like, there's no bad movies in his filmography. We're really talking about the difference between, like, good and amazing here. So, do with all this information we will. I feel like I'm rambling a little bit, as I want to do. But yeah, the short version of this is that, like, it's one of the performances of the year. It's definitely going to be one of my films of the year. And I do have one question, though. Like, I get what you're saying in terms of all the films it's clearly taking inspiration from, especially the first 20 minutes, which is very obviously an homage to The Conversation. Where do you get the Wizard of Oz from? Where is that coming out for you?
I would have to spoil the ending to talk about that, because maybe I'll tell you afterwards. But
Oh, okay. I
um,
sort of get what you're saying. Yeah,
you
I get
see,
it.
you
Yeah.
see the man, yeah, the man behind the curtain, and yeah, it was a very clear like beat for me at the end, which is
Yeah.
why I think we can't. I think we'll have to talk about the ending off air because it is a pretty major spoiler. But I think that's why the ending worked for me. It made me go, "Huh, oh, it's I okay," and the parallel, it all fit together, and it kind of resolved in a way I wasn't expecting, and resolved in a way that I found beautiful, just beautiful.
Hmm.
But I can also see, because it is a bit of a curveball, I can see why some people wouldn't like it. But that Wizard of Oz style, or the nod to it, was really beautiful for me.
So I wouldn't go so far as to say that I didn't like the ending. I would just say again that I think that it works in terms of the larger metaphor and not necessarily in terms of the narrative, if that, and the prior characterization of the character involved. Um,
Uh, I don't fully agree, but there's no way we can talk about that without destroying the ending for anyone who hasn't watched it. And you should go. You should watch this movie as blind as possible.
yeah, I will definitely agree with that. You should definitely, and I will just say again, you should 100% watch this movie. Um,
Yeah,
and
it's
it's on
amazing.
Netflix. It's easy to watch. I would definitely say, in a lot of ways, it's a very quiet movie. So the best way to watch this is going to be with intent. And to be to be fair, the best way to watch every movie is with intent. But like, make some popcorn, turn the lights off, and watch the
Turn your phone
movie.
off. Put your
Turn
phone
your phone
down.
off. Yeah, do the thing. Watch the movie, and I think you'll be rewarded by it.
Mm,
And it is the kind of movie where like I know some people who did not connect with it, and even they will say that it's worth watching because of how technically well made it is. Like, if you don't connect
mm,
with the character or the narrative, it is still worth watching because, again, it is an immaculately made movie. Like,
mm,
it is so well constructed, so well edited, so well shot and
mm.
composed. That even if you don't connect with the character or the narrative, like, there's definitely things to make it worth your time.
Yeah,
So you should definitely watch this movie.
I should.
So how many stars for you? I'm guessing
It's a
5.
5. It's a
Yeah.
5. Just brilliant. Just fantastic film. 5 stars.
Yeah. It's a 4-star movie for me, but again, like, lots of things are. I don't give out as many 5s as I used to,
Hmm.
and I don't do half stars. But this is a 4-star movie, and I wish it was a 5, but it's just a 4. I think there's some things about it that didn't quite work for me,
Hmm.
but I can't say also like it's gonna get rewatched, so who knows?
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
Good.
Um, Good. Well,
Please watch it.
let's
Yeah.
just watch the movie. It's a good movie.
Also, can I just say it's wild to me the timeline we live in, where this is just another Netflix drop, like a movie of this caliber that should be a full theatrical release, and I think should, if it was released, when was Falling Down released? If it was released at that time, it would be considered and remembered as a classic. And as it turns out, it's going to be swallowed by whatever Netflix drops on next week. It's just going to disappear. And I find that just wild. A film of this caliber is just a capital C content drop. But hey, that's another conversation.
It's interesting, actually. Just on a somewhat related note. So, last year Netflix released one of the best movies of the year, and that was All Quiet on the Western Front.
Mm.
And they did release a limited collector's edition UHD of that movie. Um, I have it. It's gorgeous. They sent me a copy. We watched it for on Remembrance Day yesterday. Um, and it's like the case is a book, and the book is full of just like essays and supplemental information. The disc itself is gorgeous. That movie in 4K, like proper disc 4K,
Mm-hmm.
is even better than I remembered it being.
Mm-hmm.
Um, And I kind of wish Netflix would do that with more of their big ticket items, like this one. I think the gorgeous limited edition, or even just like a steelbook edition of this movie, would be one that I would definitely put on my shelf.
Oh, absolutely, 100%. Yeah.
And I know that Netflix's whole thing is keeping you subscribed, but sometimes stuff disappears. I think we're seeing that with Warner Brothers just disappeared another movie they hadn't even released yet, and Netflix, to their credit, has not done that yet because they just. But the problem with Netflix being that they just need content, not like they're not making movies, they're making things to keep you online, right? And at least they understand, though, that leaving those things online is a net positive. Anyway, all I'm saying is that Netflix, if you're listening, if you put out a steelbook of this, I would buy it 100%.
Yeah. Please do. Yeah. Okay.
Anyway, we should probably move on. So we're going to move on to a TV series, which we sometimes do on this show. And this week, this coming week, so it's going to premiere with 2 episodes on Friday. What is Friday? The 17th? 17th of November, yeah. So at the time you're listening to this, it's about 5 days from today. And that is the new series on Apple TV Plus, Monarch, Legacy of Monsters. Now, for those of you who have not watched them, Legendary Pictures has been making a series of Godzilla movies, giant monster movies. And within those movies, there has been a secret agency called Monarch, which is there to monitor and research the giant monsters. Monarch, Legacy of Monsters, is a new series that is set in the same universe about the formation of that agency. And it sounds like it might be kind of boring if you're just expecting the formation of a secret agency, but it is actually one of my favorite things I've watched this year. So the setup is that there's 2 major timelines here in the show. One involves a young woman called Kate Randa. She's played by some young actress called Anna Sawai, and she is Asian American and she's Japanese American, and she is traveling to Japan because her father has recently been deceased, and they find a bunch of information that he owns some property, and he goes there. She goes to Japan and she finds this apartment, and in that apartment is her father's other wife and her half brother that she didn't know about. And he worked for Monarch, and the 2 of them end up figuring out that he's not actually dead, and they go to find him, and they learn about Monarch in the process, and eventually they hook up with Kurt Russell, who plays an aged Monarch founding member called Lee Shaw, and they go on this globe-trotting adventure, and they find a new kaiju, and a bunch of stuff happens. At the same time, we're treated to a timeline in the 50s with Wyatt Russell, Kurt Russell's actual son, playing the same character, Lee Shaw, in the 50s, alongside Anders Holm as what's his name? Also Randa. Why can I not remember his name? Bill Randa.
Bill, that's right.
Yeah, Bill Randa, and Mari Yamamoto as Keiko, and the 3 of them, he's an army man, she's a scientist, and he's a cryptozoologist, and they end up finding a giant monster, and they end up forming Monarch to track and to study giant monsters with the backing of the U.S. military. And one of the first giant monsters they find is Godzilla. This show is great. I don't really want to spoil more than the setup of it. You do get one appearance of John Goodman, who played Bill Randa in Kong Skull Island. So Anders Holm is Bill Randa in the 50s. John Goodman is him in the 70s. And then Kate Randa, Anna Sawai, and Kentaro Randa, played by Ren Watabe, are John Goodman's grandchildren in this narrative. And if you haven't seen the movies, though, that shouldn't matter. It's still a very compelling story. It's very well acted. But for those of you like me who love giant monsters, who eat these movies up, this show does an extremely good job of weaving its narrative in and around the films we've already seen, in ways that I know I've seen that Simon hasn't, because I've seen 8 of the 10 episodes, and I think you've seen 4. You're in on number 5, I think, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But also just adding a ton of not only depth but breadth to the series, adding like how deep Monarch goes, how far reaching it is, the nature of the kaiju themselves, and a little bit about where they come from, and the way that Monarch just interacts with the worlds, and the way that the kaiju interact with the world. I don't know what else to really say that's not a spoiler, but I will say that like Anna Sawai is fantastic. I think she has to do most of the heavy lifting in terms of like character work, because she's the protagonist, so that makes sense. But she has some of the most difficult stuff to do, and she carries it off beautifully. And it turns out that Kurt Russell is a goddamn movie star, and Wyatt Russell, who is his real son and looks so much like him that it feels like cheating they're playing the same character. It has the same energy, and seeing that character in the 2 time frames is super interesting for reasons I can't talk about because you're not there yet. And then to top it all off, the interesting thing about this show is that it's a show about Monarch. It's not a show about the giant monsters. So the giant monster action is actually a little sparse. If you're going into this movie expecting to see a Godzilla battle every episode, I'm here to tell you you're going to be disappointed in that aspect. There's probably an argument to be made that maybe it corrects a little too far in the other direction, like at least in terms of the marketing. The marketing has Godzilla front and center all the time, and in the first like 5 episodes, he shows up twice. Maybe 3 times? I think it's twice. However, both of the times he shows up, goddamn incredible. There's a moment in episode 2 of this. It's pretty much immediately revealed that Kate Randa, Anna Sawai's character, is a survivor of the 2014 Godzilla attack on San Francisco. The 2014 battle between Godzilla and the Mutos from the 2014 movie Godzilla. And there's a moment where Godzilla is crashing through the Golden Gate Bridge and looks right at her and bellows, and that scene gave me literal goosebumps. Like actual legitimate goosebumps. And that's before you find out a few episodes later the full context of the scene, which is just amazing. Like I don't even want to say how I felt about it, because I feel like that would be a spoiler. And there's a later scene in a later episode, an episode or 2 later, where there's a long, slow shot of Godzilla where it's basically like a drone shot that starts at his tail and goes up and weaves through his spines all the way up to his head. And it is so well done. Like some of the best effects I've seen in a TV show in ages, some of the best character animation I've seen in ages, maybe since the last of these movies. Like they're clearly putting the same money and care towards the effects in these movies as they did, or the show as they did in the movies. And I think they've done a really good job in the movies. So if you might be disappointed that you're not going to see Godzilla every episode, but you're not going to be disappointed when you see him, because every scene with him is incredible. I feel like I'm rambling a bit. Have I said anything you disagree with at this point, Simon?
No, not at all. I know I'm letting you go because I know you love these movies. You love Godzilla for old and new, and you know a lot about them, and I don't have that depth of knowledge. And I've also not liked any of the Monarch movies, really. As I've said to you before, I don't like the Skull Island or the King of the Monsters. I turned off after half an hour because I couldn't take the scripting and the acting. I haven't seen versus Kong. We've had a discussion before about your argument is it doesn't matter because it's giant monsters punching each other. And
I'm going to say, like, I sort of get that, like, there's a lot of visual metaphors in Kong Skull Island that are very heavily like inspired by the likes of like Apocalypse Now, and they're very surface level. And if you bounce off them, I get it. Like it's not as deep as it thinks it is. However, King Kong also uses a large boat propeller attached to a chain to kill a giant three-legged monster. Like, it's amazing. It's
I
amazing.
so this is the argument we always have here, because it's not enough for me. I need the monsters to be behind the human story, and I need them to be framed as such. And I think I totally agree with you that the Monarch TV show has gone heavily into the human story. Luckily, it's brilliantly scripted, it's brilliantly acted, and when the monsters do turn up, like when you mentioned Godzilla, they are shot in a way at a scale, from a human scale, that makes them feel big and scary, and this unstoppable force of nature, which I never really got from the movies at all. I think having a sparse use of your kaiju is a very good way to incorporate them into a story. Now, it on the flip side, if you want lots and lots of monster battles, you're not going to get them here. And I also think, as good as Godzilla is in this TV show, and he really is amazing. He looks very classic, but also dangerous, huge, and brilliantly shot. I can't stop thinking about. I know you've mentioned it, but there's a shot where she gets the camera's pointing at Alice by getting off a bus, Kate getting off a bus, and the bus blocks the like three-quarters of the frame, and as the camera pulls back, Godzilla sort of sweeps into frame behind and roars at her. It's incredible, and it feels dangerous, and everything it should do.
What's just interesting,
but
what I think is also really interesting, and what I think the show does really well, is it makes clear that it's also not malicious. Like, he's not angry. He's not like coming to kill the humans. He's just a force of nature who's there.
Yeah.
It might as well be a hurricane that's destroyed the bridge, right? Like, he's not. He's big, and he's clearly intelligent, but he's not like. He's not there to kill humans because he's angry. He's just there to because of the reasons he's there. Like, it's a whole thing. I really love it's weird to think of. It might be weird to think of Godzilla as a character, but as a character, he's really well conceived in the show.
And as good as he is, I would say that doesn't quite stretch to the other monsters. There's a dragon-esque thing, and there's an ice thing, and they don't look as good. I think the design isn't quite as there for either of those. I would say, and also the CG is not quite there. But the what I really, really, really love about the show is that it's framing the human struggles against the threat of these monsters, rather having the humans as a superfluous part of the monsters just fighting each other, and I absolutely love that. And what's nice as well is that it's taking a lot of cues from Lost, and it's having like 50% of the mystery box, in that it is setting things up and then slowly answering them without really introducing other things you don't know, which is it's an unfurling of narrative, which I really like, across the storylines, across the timelines. But Lord help me, give me an entire movie with Wyatt Russell and Mari Yamamoto in that time period, in that costume. Like, Wyatt Russell is so good at this like 50s action hero, and Mari Yamamoto is so good as his foil that he slowly like develops these feelings for. I love that period in particular. The modern, or I say modern, the most modern stuff, because it's what, 2015 it's meant to be.
Yeah, the main narrative of the show takes place in 2015, which places it after Godzilla, but before King of the Monsters.
Right. So I really like that too, and I think it's down to the dynamics of the cast and the way they're written, the bounce off each other, is really, really good. Like, Kirstie Clemens is this kind of really interesting character who's the hacker character, but she's American but living in Japan, and she's a great actor. She conveys so much. But and Anna Spy is fantastic, and really, I said this to you by text this week. Like, I'm so glad that Kurt Russell is still fucking brilliant. Like, he was such a huge star of so many movies I loved when I was really, really young. And to see him just still in command of a screen, he is so commanding. And what's really nice as well, I think Wyatt Russ is one of the best working actors at the moment, and I think he is a bit of a chameleon. And so I am really, really enjoying his impression of his dad. Like, he's clearly doing a young Kurt Russell impression, and he obviously because of the genetics, but as a working actor as well, he's really worked. I think he's probably studied a lot of Big Trouble in Little China and the Thing era Kurt Russell, uh, to get all the tiny little reactions and like little mouth movements. It's just so satisfying to see him as a young Kurt Russell. Um, but I love it. I love the show. I think I'm halfway through 5, and I think I would probably like a bit more Monster now at this point. But it's a very minor quibble. It's a quality TV show that I haven't seen. And to be fair, I think Apple maybe have a different approach to their TV shows. A lot of their shows are really good quality. Apple TV Plus that don't that Netflix doesn't feel like it has the same kind of quality. I really like if you compare this to Severance and For All Mankind and the party after party, and they're all
Ted Lasso,
like
Mythic Quest,
super
Lessons in
high quality.
Chemistry. Lessons in
Yeah.
Chemistry is excellent.
Oh, is that good? I haven't seen it yet.
Blackbird is excellent.
So
I'm just going to jump in just really quick and say
Yeah.
that it's a fairly common misconception to think that Apple TV Plus wants to be Netflix. They very clearly want to be HBO.
Right.
And I think that they are succeeding. Mostly they are succeeding. I think they have a much higher hit rate with their series than movies, but that's also kind of true of HBO. So it's interesting because this is a total aside, but I had recently, after the strikes ended, all of the streaming services raised their price, and I was having a conversation with a critic friend of mine, and he was like, I don't want to pay, like Apple TV Plus was $6, now it's $10. That's a huge increase. And my rebuttal was that, like, they don't have the depth of, like, they don't have anything other than their originals. They don't have a huge library of other stuff, but the stuff they make is so good that for my money, Apple TV Plus is probably the last one I would unsubscribe from, because they have such a high hit rate. And yeah, you're not wrong that like these people aren't wrong that like it is nice to be able to go on Netflix and watch a bazillion old movies, but that number is consistently dwindling as more streaming services start up. And again, like the hit rate of originals is so high on Apple TV Plus that it is, I think they're one of the most worthwhile services currently going. And they're not a sponsor, for the record. I just think that they're doing really good work. So do with all that information what you will. Anyway, sorry, I interrupted.
I think I was just generally saying how great it is, and it feels like quality. And I think since Lost, I think there have been many series who've tried to do that slow unfurling of story through flashbacks and back and forth and revelation storytelling. And I think most of them have been entirely unsuccessful because Lost did it so well. I'm getting big Lost vibes from this in a really, really good way. I think it is. It's not wasting the viewer's time. Everything that is revealed slowly feels fitting to the story, and it's really nice actually because it jumps around, and so it will tell you something later that you kind of noticed earlier, and suddenly that thing you noticed earlier makes sense in the narrative now. Like, oh, that's why I saw that micro reaction earlier. I think it's been put together very thoughtfully, and it's written very, very well. It's acted very well. This is a great TV show, and it's so much better for me than all the Monarch movies, which feel like completely throwaway, disposable pieces of film for me. This feels almost like a completely different approach to it.
So as someone who likes the legendary MonsterVerse, very generally speaking, whilst also admitting that, like, yeah, they're not all great. What I think a really interesting point about the Monarch series is that everything you're saying about how it emphasizes the human element in an interesting way and sets it against this backdrop of giant monsters is basically you're saying it's a much more successful execution of what 2014's Godzilla tried to be. And
Oh yeah,
I know that I like that movie and you're not too hot on
yeah.
it, but like that movie, which has, you know, Aaron Taylor Johnson existing basically like in between the footsteps of Godzilla, right? Like
Yeah,
it's very much
totally.
like him and everyone who's trying to just survive the onslaught. And there's not really in that movie, the balance is definitely off. Like I definitely wanted to see more of Godzilla fighting, but
Mm-hmm.
I like that movie, but this is a better version of what that movie
Yes,
is trying to do.
100%.
Um,
Absolutely.
and that might also just be that like, and I don't actually think that Aaron Taylor Johnson is bad in the movie. I think he's totally fine. I don't think he's great. I think he's just fine. Um, but I think it really helps that the cast of the show is entirely magnetic. Like even people I've
Yeah,
never heard of before, like
yeah.
Kentaro is played by a Japanese actor called Ren Watabe, who I've never seen before, and he's so compelling as that
Mm,
he's him and Anna Sawai are these like they didn't know they're half siblings, they didn't know each other existed, and the way they play off each other is so natural and believable. Like
mm,
I can never imagine being in that situation, but I believe them in this situation, right? Like
yeah.
they are so good together, and the way they both react to their father, who is only on screen for like moments at a time, but every time he's there and anyone interacts with them in whether it's in flashback or in the present, um,
Mm,
everything about their relationship works so well.
mm,
And I don't know if you're there yet, but there's an episode where they do go to San Francisco and like you get to
mm-hmm.
see what the place
Yeah,
looks like a year post Godzilla, post G Day as they call it.
yeah.
And even that is so well put together, like just
Mm-hmm.
so thoughtful, and the whole like bureaucracy around who can go in, who can't, is also just so
Mm,
like definitely like on point for the way American bureaucracy seems to work.
yeah.
Um, it's hard to talk about some of the things I'm really liking about the show right now. A, because it'd be a spoiler for you, dear listeners, but also because I'm about 3 episodes ahead of Simon, and there's definitely stuff I want to say that he hasn't seen
Mm,
yet. There's another just awe-inspiring shot of Godzilla in a later episode that
mm,
is just so good. Um, and I was gonna say, if I have a complaint about this, so the very first episode of the show starts with John Goodman in the 70s on Skull Island, because he is in the movie Kong Skull Island, and he records a video of himself and tosses a bag into the sea, and that becomes the MacGuffin for the first part of the season. And I kind of wish, and I wonder if we're going to get this in a potential second season, but I kind of wish there was some more flashbacks to the 70s. Like I would very much like to see an aged up Wyatt Russell interacting with John Goodman in the 70s. Um, I know the reason why they don't, and I think I think it's a spoiler. It hasn't explicitly been
yeah,
revealed yet, so it's a
yeah.
spoiler why they're not. I think they're not doing that to avoid a spoiler about what's going to happen in probably episode 9 or 10. Um, but I hope that in season 2 we get more of like 70s Monarch, like slightly more established Monarch than the early formative days of Monarch in the 50s. I
Mm-hmm.
would love to see more, and even like even flashbacks to like the 80s or 90s would be great. You know, like
Mm-hmm.
I would love to see more of that time frame. Um,
Mm-hmm.
if it is written as thoughtfully as this season has been. Um,
Absolutely.
but there's definitely some stuff coming that I think is really interesting, and I'm confident that it will, and I'm really hope that it pays off. I'm very
Mm-hmm.
very excited for it. And
Yeah.
also, and this is just a total minor note, the show has a great supporting performance by Christopher Heyerdahl, who, if you don't know who that is, spoiler alert, you definitely know who that is because he's in basically every show that's shot here in Vancouver and in Canada in general. And he plays a U.S. Army general, and I love him in this. He's very supporting. He's only in a couple of episodes, but he's so fucking good as the sort of like no nonsense, pragmatic, like this is the way it is. U.S. Army general.
Yes.
I love him so much. He's I think he's one of our, like, interestingly, I think he's one of Canada's great character actors who nobody knows who he is. But he's uniformly great in this show.
Yeah, he is great.
Anyway,
good.
so
I mean, I don't really want to give stars to it at this point. It's floating around 4 stars. I don't know where you are. You've seen the whole thing. Like, are you gonna give a star?
So I haven't seen the whole thing. I've seen there are going to be 10 episodes.
Oh.
I have seen 8 of the episodes.
Oh, I thought 8 was the total.
And I will say that it is definitely at least 4 stars for me at this point. I would say that there are definitely some episodes that are stronger than others. However, like, we're talking about some episodes are a 4 and some are a 5. I think it's probably going to average out to a 4. And I legitimately cannot wait to see the last 2.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, when I first watched this, when they first delivered screeners to me for this, they gave me, I think, 3. And I watched them and I was like, how long do I have to wait? Like, are they going to give me, like, how long do I have to wait to watch the end of this? Like, it's been a while since I've been this excited about a show.
Yeah.
And I can't wait to see the rest of it. And I 100% I'll rewatch it. And I can say that with confidence because they first gave me 3 and then they gave me 5. And I rewatched the first 3 when I watched the 4 and 5. So, like, it's definitely rewatchable as well. So do with all that what you will. This show is an Apple TV Plus exclusive. The first 2 episodes are on Friday the 17th, and it's going to be weekly after that. And I would say set your calendars because it's great, and I think everyone should watch it. Yeah,
I do too. And especially if you are of the age where you experienced Lost the first time. It's got some big Lost vibes. Like when Lost was really on the ball, when it knew what it was doing before it didn't. It feels that well put together. It's really, really good.
Yeah, it's like season 1 Lost, not season 3 Lost.
Not 3, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Good.
You know, it's Lost before they lost the plot and after they found it again. But better than the latter of those. So.
Just to clarify that.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, that's it. Definitely. So two things this week. Definitely watch both of them. And then, as a side note, we haven't talked about it because we don't know when Simon's going to get to see it. But The Marvels is out and it's great, and you should see it. That's my 1 sentence review. I do not know. I mean, I know why people are complaining about it because the YouTube rage farming cycle is in full swing, but like, it's a fun movie. It's a fun 95 minutes at the movies, man. Like, go watch the movie. It's a great time. Anyway, I just wanted to get that on the record. Yeah. Well, I think we're going to wrap it up there. Yeah. Do you have anything else you want to add, Simon?
No, not really. Just go and watch all this stuff. It's all really good stuff, and it's nice to have good stuff because I think I can be a bit more negative than Matt. In my time is so limited and my consciousness is so limited, and if things don't work for me, they really don't work. And so it's been really nice to have a week with 2 things that work really, really well for me. So please go watch them.
Yeah, that's totally fair. Well, let's end it there. We're basically at time. Thank you again so much for listening. We hope that you have enjoyed the show. If you have thoughts about either thing, either The Killer or Monarch, do let us know. We're on all the socials, and you can find all those socials linked in the show notes. You'll find them linked to our respective homepages because there are too many social medias to list. But get in touch. We have that. We have a contact form. All of it is in the show notes. If you've liked the show, please consider supporting us. You can do that a number of ways, the 2 most important being subscribe to the show. We're on every major podcasting platform. So whichever one you are listening to on, just hit the subscribe button or hit the like button or hit the 5-star review button. Like, hit the buttons, man. Smash those buttons. And we also do have a Patreon. You can find that at patreon.com/MC Simpson. And those things will help us keep the lights on. You can also find the homepage for this episode. It'll be linked in the show notes, and it'll be at our homepage, awesomefriday.ca. But the page for this episode in particular will have streaming links powered by Just Watch that tell you where you can watch both of these things. And if you use those links, that will also help us keep the lights on. Last but not least, we are here in Vancouver. We're on the unceded and ancestral territory of the Musqueam and Tsleil-Waututh and Squamish nations. One last time, thank you so much for listening and for joining us on this Awesome Friday.
Thanks, bye.